Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to Approaches to Literature. It's Monday. I've had a chance to look at some of your work in regards to your first submission and your second submission. And I just wanted to address a couple of things in terms of the stories themselves and also what I'll be expecting to you from those submissions. Very pleased with most of them and glad to see most of you are on board, but let me just say right now, a number of you I haven't heard from yet, and it's very important, as I stated in my message, to not fall behind at this point so early in the term. So please get me those submissions as quickly as you can. One thing in common we have with all the first three stories, obviously, is they're all told with first-person narration. We're looking at a very specific world as filtered through our narrators. And that's what we have to really begin to concentrate on as one of our main tools, the voice of the author, of course, whether it be autobiographical or not. Not really that important, although we'll talk more later in the term about, of course, the influence of one's own environment, and we can certainly feel that very heavily in A&P. Its time period, of course, too, the late 1950s. One of the earlier stories for which the author is known. But we have to begin to identify the voice in all of these, the first three stories, in A&P, in Uncle Ben's Choice, and later in What You Pawn, I Will Redeem. So one of the things that I noticed that some of you are beginning to judge the characters because I've asked you, who are we sympathizing with? And rather than jump to a judgment, for instance, on Queenie's morals, her class upbringing, her rudeness, perhaps, is to ask ourselves, what does Sammy feel? Sammy's the one who's speaking. And of course, if you've done your reading in the beginning of the chapter, or the beginning of the story's Seagull Reader, you'll see the importance of identifying the narrator's voice and then trying to enter the world through that voice. Now, of course, narrators are not always reliable. They're not going to tell us everything. Certainly Sammy doesn't. Sammy doesn't tell us an awful lot. And so we have to dig a little deeper, try to determine how Sammy's feeling, even when he doesn't let us know. And in other words, it's more implicit than explicit. And certainly that can also be true, said to be true in Uncle Ben's Choice. But sticking with this idea of the narrator's voice, reliable or not, we want to identify the sympathies of that voice rather than make judgments based on our own cultural upbringing, what we may think may have been true back in the 1950s, rather than judging Queenie, for instance, on what we may believe about sexism, misogyny here in 2017 was quite different back in the 1950s. Assignment 3 asks you to look at the three stories and ask about their choices and the choices that they make. And number 4 asks you to choose from the selections. And I want to ask you now, with assignment 4, to please include the Sherman Alexie story, What You Pawn, I Will Redeem, as one of the stories that you address in assignment 4. I'll return to some of the ideas in these three stories, but let me jump now to addressing some of the things that I want you to remember as you're preparing your submissions. And if you go to, I believe it's assignment 5, you'll see a list of things that I want you to really pay attention to as you're preparing your your small essays. And these are essays in themselves, these 3-paragraph submissions that you are preparing. And they have to be of a certain length. They should be between 6 and 8 sentences a piece. And they should begin to reflect how these stories, the primary sources that we're addressing during the term, in other words, these stories specifically, how you use them when you're making your determinations or building your arguments within your essays as you move along. In other words, you're going to want to use those primary sources again and again, reflecting on what you've read, comparing and contrasting with what you're reading currently. And you also want to consider going outside these primary sources to secondary sources and including them in your essay responses. And as those instructions in Assignment 5 make clear, you should have pretty much at least 3 citations for each of your submissions. Because we want to be specific when we make a claim, build an argument, just as if we're writing an argumentative essay. We want to have evidence, textual evidence that comes out of the stories. That gets us away from using our own prejudices, our own cultural background to make these judgments, and rely on the stories themselves, and rely on the feelings of scholars and experts who have looked at these stories. And it's very important that we build these essays as we go along, and so that they're very full-bodied. It's important that as you move into the 3rd and the 4th essay, the What You Pawn, and into Sonny's Blues, that we begin to move away from only thinking about the voice of the narrator, and we're still first-person narratives here, but also to move into the world of the narrator. Obviously, very important, even in Uncle Ben's Choice. The magical realism of Chinua Achebe's story. The way that their experiences are translated through the customs and the very distant foreign customs to us, especially in Uncle Ben's Choice, and to begin to experience what happens in the story, the plot of the story, through those cultural worlds that the author's bringing to us. So I want you to move from thinking about the voice, very important though, but to move to think about the setting and what the book in the introductory section of the book refers to as projections, projecting the world of the narrator and how that projection affects our overall assumptions about what happens in the story, what the story means to the narrator. So projection is another term that I'd like you to become familiar with in those first sections that you should be reading now. We also want to begin to think about symbols, the different kinds of symbols that are going to appear. I know lots of students begin to get a little crazed when we start talking about symbols, but they're really very simple. We'll often find them in the titles. If you find that there is an object in the title, we could look to A and B. What does the A and B mean? We can look to Sonny's Blues. If you have some background and understanding of what blues music is, it has a symbol, a very strong symbol. We don't might not think of it as a symbol, We may think of it as just a genre of music, but if you know something about the works of the author, of James Baldwin, you know the importance of the blues to all of his writing, and then you have to understand what the blues means to his character or characters, and more than just a genre of music, but one which filtered through the story, what happens in the story, we come to understand as having much greater meaning. So, as the book will indicate, these symbols, these kinds of symbols, it's a good thing to become familiar with the different kinds that exist. And we have a universal symbols. Often that is something as simple as dawn, and as the sun rising can often mean renewal. Now that's a very sort of universal symbol. It would cover all of the various different cultures. Then we might have what we call a conventional symbol, which may be limited to a particular place, and not have a wider meaning. I think the book refers to the symbols that we have of the Wild West, of John Wayne sitting in his saddle, how such a symbol can come to mean the West, the ruggedness and independence of the West. There's also the literary symbols, the more abstract symbols that are more tied to the story itself. And so don't get crazed about, oh my God, I don't understand the symbols. You know more than you think. But it does help to understand a story when you give something, be it a character, be it an object, be it a tone in the story. If you give it a wider identification, a wider meaning, sometimes the story becomes alive to you in all different kinds of ways. For instance, in What You Pawn, what is the meaning, the symbol of that headdress of the grandmother? Obviously, it's has much more meaning than simply something that his grandmother had, or he believes might actually be in this pawn shop. It has a much broader meaning to us, for us, and it's helpful to identify them. And you, in more cases than not, you can do it without much help. Then we have allegories in which actual characters have representations. And then we have motifs. Motifs get into symbols that are repeated again and again. And we'll talk more about motifs. These are tools that are used by authors to remind us of the importance of something by repeating it again and again, almost the way a chorus does in a song. A chorus in a song is a motif of a kind. Just a reminder then again that when you are addressing assignment number 4, please include as one of your stories the What You Pawn. And when we get to Sonny's Blues for assignment 5, think about doing perhaps a little extra reading about James Baldwin. He's a figure who's, in fact, I showed just recently a new documentary film about him, which is available on Netflix if you have it, about his life and career as a writer, one who returned from France as an expatriate, and returned during the Civil Rights era because he felt a commitment to what was going on. He felt he could no longer stay out of his own country. He needed to come home to address so many of the problems that he saw from a distance. And so many of those problems are apparent in Sonny's Blues. Look, of course, so closely at this relationship between the two brothers, and try not to make judgments about Sonny. You may have very strong views about the use of hard drugs like heroin. Understandable, totally. But remember to try to see the story, in this case, through the view, the lens of the older brother. And think about it. If you have a younger or older brother yourself, in my case, I'm a younger brother. My brother is 7 years older than I am, just as in the story. Sometimes when we begin to give it a personal association, the story comes alive in many ways when we do that. So keep on plugging away, folks. I will continue to be looking at your assignments as they come in. If you have any questions, please address them to me in the emails. Again, please read those introductory chapters in Roman numerals that have to do with terms, that have to do with what I'll be expecting you to address in your essay submissions. And also in Assignment 5, look at the list of things specifically that I'll be looking for, so that you can get the credit that is due you if you've done that work according to the requirements. At the end of next week, I'm going to be trying to find ways, or trying to set up a list of times when we can reach out to each other, either by Skype or by phone. I've had some people question that they don't think that they're going to have the time to connect, but I think it's really good if we get to know each other a little better, and I'll have an idea by the beginning of next week, probably, where some of your work is going, and be able to address ways in which I might be able to help you. And so we can do that by phone. I would prefer to do it by Skype if you can. So look for something soon about that. Thanks for everybody for staying on board. Have fun with these stories. They're great, and I look forward to reading more of your submissions as they come in. So have a great week, and I will be talking to you very soon. Ciao for now.